Hello, I'm Dr. Ken Landau. Thanks for watching. Let's talk about Zyrtec. Zyrtec, or cetirizine. It was originally approved as a prescription antihistamine in 1995. Went over the counter, no prescription necessary for adults or for children, as of 2008. The second generation antihistamines, of which Zyrtec is one, are thought not to have a tendency to cross the blood-brain barrier. If they don't cross the blood-brain barrier and don't get into the brain, they're less likely to cause drowsiness, sleepiness, or tiredness compared to the first generation drugs like Benadryl or chlortrimeton. Now, actually, the first generation drugs get into the brain so much that a lot of people still use them as sleep aids or treatment for insomnia. Of the three second-generation drugs, Allegra or fexofenadine, Claritin or loratadine, Zyrtec or cetirizine, the Zyrtec is the one most likely to get into the brain, and as such is the one most likely to cause drowsiness, even though it's marketed as a non-drowsy or non-sedating antihistamine. Now, it's a relative of a first-generation drug called hydroxyzine. Hydroxyzine does very readily get into the brain. Anything that occupies more than 50% of the histamine receptors inside the brain is likely to cause drowsiness. Hydroxyzine occupies about 70% of those histamine receptors, so it's going to have a good likelihood of causing drowsiness. On the other hand, an equivalent dose of Zyrtec, cetirizine, 10 milligrams, only about 10 to 15% occupancy of those histamine receptors. 20 milligram dose, only about 25% occupancy of the histamine receptors. Therefore, you're not likely to get sedated when you take Zyrtec, but you could, so you have to be careful. What do we take antihistamines for? Well, we take antihistamines basically for seasonal or perennial hay fever, or nasal allergies, runny nose, itchy, watery eyes, sneezing. Sometimes we take them for rashes or hives. But you have to realize that if histamine is either not involved, as in an upper respiratory infection when you have a runny nose because of a virus infection, hey, that's not histamine, and you're not likely to be improved. And additionally, if you have a condition where it's histamine and a variety of other chemicals that are involved, well, the antihistamines are only going to act on the histamine portion, and that means you're still going to have symptoms. Well, it's also good for urticaria, for hives. There are two different kinds of hives. There's the short-acting hive, acute urticaria, and the long-acting hives, we call it the chronic urticaria lasting more than 6 weeks. And it may well be helpful, maybe not at the standard dose of 10 milligrams, maybe have to take 20 milligrams, a higher dose. The studies of the higher dose are very small and very short and not very good. Well, it seems that the Zyrtec combines two molecules. And the two molecules are what we call mirror images of each other. It's kind of like your right and your left hand. They're pretty doggone close, but they're not equivalent. They're not interchangeable. So too with the Zyrtec molecule. It contains a right-handed and a left-handed molecule. It contains the dextrocetirizine and the levocetirizine. In fact, the right hand and the left hand. And what happens is the body only recognizes the levocetirizine. It totally ignores the dextrocetirizine, might not even be there. And as a matter of fact, the dextrocetirizine is 100 times less effective, less potent than the levocetirizine. So that leads to some drug company, one might call it hanky-panky or interesting activity. What they did is they decided right at the factory, as the patent was wearing down, in order to prolong the revenue stream, hey, why don't we just get rid of the dextrocetirizine, and then we can market the drug. It's still the same 5 milligrams of the drug, 5 milligrams of the active drug, 5 milligrams of the levocetirizine. Let's market that. We'll give it a new name, and we'll say it's a new and improved form or a different form. And that's what Zysol is. Zysol is 5 milligrams of the levocetirizine. They just, at the factory, got rid of the dextrocetirizine. A lot of drug companies seem to do that nowadays. Interestingly enough, even though the two drugs should be exactly the same, in one study that was published in Pediatric Allergy and Immunology several years ago, they actually found that the original, the Zyrtec, the cetirizine, was better than the Zysol. Now it comes in different strengths, comes in 10 milligram tablets, 5 milligram chewable tablets, and it also comes in a 5 milligram per teaspoon liquid. It's available for individuals over 6 months of age. Obviously the dose differs from as low as 2.5 milligrams for young children to 10 milligrams would be the standard dose, 20 milligrams for special purposes in adults. And it's important to realize that now it comes in combination for some people with a decongestant. So you can get the Zyrtec or Zyrtec D, or similarly, of course, the cetirizine or cetirizine D. It's rapidly absorbed. Food doesn't affect its total amount in the body, but it will affect how long it takes to build up in the bloodstream. So if you take it on an empty stomach, it's going to get in and start working as fast as 20 minutes, but it's going to take a little bit longer if you take it with a meal. It tends not to accumulate in the bloodstream. Half-life is about 8 hours. Children get rid of the drug faster than adults, and if you're over age 65, it's going to stick around for considerably longer. It's going to tend to not be metabolized nearly as effectively. 70–80% goes out in the urine, about 10–15% goes out in the stool. Maybe if you have liver disease, you should take a little bit less. It tends to work mostly on the histamine receptor. So that means it's less likely, say, than Benadryl to cause some anticholinergic effects. Anticholinergic effects are problems, say, with dry mouth. Well, fortunately, it doesn't seem to affect the heart. There are some drugs that affect what's known as a QT interval. This one doesn't seem to affect that. But it may cause, in as many as 1 in 6 individuals, some headache. It might cause some dry mouth in as many as 1 in 16 individuals. And 5 to 10% of people, even though it's non-sedating, 5 to 10% of the people are going to be drowsy when they take the drug. Rarely develop other kind of symptoms. Rarely have other side effects. Pretty safe in women who are pregnant or women who are breastfeeding if they have a reason to take the drug. On discontinuation of the drug, if you had an underlying problem with allergies and the drug was responsible for treating the itching and the sneezing and the runny nose, yeah, it can certainly come back if you stop the drug. Now, when you add a decongestant, and a decongestant is pseudoephedrine, instead of taking 1 a day of the Zyrtec or the cetirizine, you have to take 2 a day typically of the decongestant form. So if you're taking the cetirizine D, the Zyrtec D, typically you take 1 in the morning, 1 at night, as opposed to 1 all day long. But you have to realize once you add the decongestant, then you can add the potential for some side effects. So if you're a gentleman over age 50 or 60 with an enlarged prostate, you're going to have some difficulty urinating maybe. If you have high blood pressure, can push the blood pressure further up. Potential problem for people with diabetes or ischemic heart disease, or people who have elevated pressure inside the eye, or even hyperthyroidism. The good news is that you can buy the generic form for pennies a day. If you buy the name brand, it's going to cost considerably more, up to about $1 a pill, as opposed to, say, 5 or 6 or 7 cents if you buy the generic form. If you buy the form that has a decongestant, it's going to cost considerably more. So the bottom line is, if you have allergies and if histamine is the culprit, well, then take an antihistamine. And whether you pick cetirizine, whether you pick fexofenadine, whether you pick loratadine, that means whether you pick Zyrtec or Allegra, or whether you take Claritin, it doesn't make much difference. They all seem to work fairly well. But remember, the most important thing is, if you do suffer from chronic allergies, the professional societies say the intranasal Steroids, drugs like Flonase, work much better, cause fewer side effects. So think about that. I'm Dr. Ken Landau. Thanks for watching.